Good evening, everybody. It's great privilege to host such great professionals as Professor Alicja Gałązka and Alex Thorpe. And it is for the first time that I'm absolutely puzzled. And I hope that soon I will learn what does it mean, centrality of communicative competence in English language teaching and testing. Ladies and gentlemen, let me greet you very warmly. I'm so happy that we are all together. This year, this is the 30th year of IETFL Poland. And this is a special day because we have prepared a lot of fabulous events. And we are so grateful that Alex Thorpe and Alicja Gałązka, Professor Alicja Gałązka, were so kind and decided to share with us their great professional knowledge. Mr. Thorpe has already been with us, and Alicja also shared her expertise, especially in psychology. Alicja talked about empathy, about how to be good for ourselves, how to about well-being of a teacher, and most of the topics so far were of some kind of psychology oriented. But today I sense that we've got occasion to hear something about linguistics. Am I right?
Yeah, sure, you are right. But of course, I will have my psychological hat on. So Alex will be the linguistic part and I will be the psycholinguistic part, but I hope we will manage together.
And the two are very much related.
Yes. Yeah, we see the correlation between these two fields. Yeah.
Let me tell you, my dear friends here on webinar in Click Meeting Room, and also our dear friends on Facebook, that Alex is a teacher trainer. He's been interested in neurolinguistics, so I can see there's a strong link between Alex and Alicja here, but also strong evidence-based teaching. And both Alicja and Alex are working with Trinity College London, and Alex has had a great experience in teacher training, especially about English language assessment, especially CLIL. And I can tell you that Alex loves to sing.
No, he sings excellently.
Don't encourage me.
We will.
And of course, apart from the fact that Alicja is a great friend of IETFL Poland, Alicja in IETFL Poland is responsible for drama and psychology, special interest groups. And of course, she cares of the well-being with her soft voice, of the well-being of us in IETF and all teachers with her soft voice, but also with great expertise in psychology and also psychotherapy. And also teacher training. Thank you very much, guys, that you're here with us. And now over to you, Alicja and Alex, the centrality of communicative competence in English language teaching and assessment.
Thank you very much, Martin, for introducing us. We're really very happy to be here, and because I usually take care of your well-being, so I need to ask how well you are, if you are staying healthy. in this difficult time. So you can write in chat how you are feeling. And today, actually, the master of the show is Alex, because he will be talking about language testing and communicative competence. But as we said, we will talk a little bit about communication. So as you know, communication is very much psychologically correlated. So I would like to start because when we talk about communication, it seems that it's very clear and it's easy because we all communicate. But then when you analyze some problems, difficulties people have in their personal and professional life, usually the reason for the difficulties is the lack of communication. So communication is really something very, very important in our life. And it's not only a process of sending and receiving information among people, but it's also something which forms relationship between people. So I would like to ask you first, when you think about the communication and communicator, what makes a good communicator? Could you write in chat? What makes a good communicator? Confidence, openness. Okay, thank you. Good listening skills, flexibility, understanding. Okay. Feedback. Lots of interesting things here. The stopping and searching, accommodation skills. Thank you, Grzesiu. Being interested in the topic. Okay. All right. Well, constructive criticism. We have lots of different things written here. Body language, active listening. Yes, body language also very important, because when we talk about communication, it's usually verbal and non-verbal communication. And this body language is really very important, because sometimes we communicate more using body language than the words. Okay, Alex, so maybe you can move our presentation.
Thank you. We had said I'm getting a really bad feedback. That's perfect. And here was some that came up, and actually these were reflected very much in some of the suggestions we've made about that good communicator. And just another question I'm going to ask, Alicia, we didn't mention this earlier, but think of that good communicator and how do you feel about that person? And I would argue, I don't know, what's your general opinion of that person? Would it be positive or negative? And do, again, put any comments into the chat box. But that idea is that often if someone is a good communicator, we tend to perceive them positively. We tend to have a positive relationship. Why? Because often they do listen, they do take on a lot, and actually they share a lot. And we'll come back onto that in a moment. But that's what we're going to talk about, is essentially what is communication, how do we do it, and why is it important that we really pull apart what we would call a construct. Now, I will refer to testing, but overall we'll look at just general teaching practice and what we mean by communication, and what we mean by communicative competence. Okay, so let's dive in at the deep end. I thought let's have some fun. Now we're all teaching. Can I just write a yes? Who's been teaching online today or spent several hours in front of a screen? Just put a quick yes in the chat box. Yeah, me. Okay, so you're probably, thank you so much for joining us for even more time on a screen. We will try to make it as interactive as we can as we go along. And I thought we'd do this just as a quick activity. Now, have you heard of communicative competence before? Because it's a notion that we've mentioned, it's in the title. Matthew said as we began, what is this that we're going to talk about? So hopefully we'll make it very clear. But communicative competence is a very clear notion. It's a very defined concept about what it is to be a good and effective communicator. But this isn't the way we've always understood using language. Now, I'm going to be referring to English in this webinar, but actually communicative competence and all of the theory we approach and refer to today is as applicable for any language. Now, we are also talking about learning a second language, and this is why we're going to pull apart communicative competence. But it would be the same in your first operating language and then learning any other language, whatever language it might be. So let's look at the history for a quick moment. I've put 5 lozenges or capsules or whatever you want to call them down the bottom with date periods. So from the 1880s up to 1990s through to the present day. And then you have some letters. Hopefully you can see these. So if you can read that really simple matching exercise. So which of these A, B, C, D, or E refers to the 1880s? So would it be performance was understood as competence, which is A? Negotiation of meaning came out, that was B. Was it about the primacy of speaking, direct method and grammar translation, which is C? Is it about an interactional concept, which is D? Or is it about focus on teaching in proficiency, which is E? Wow, you thought it would be easy. You could just sit and listen. Well, no such chance. So 1880s, throw a letter in the chat box, A, B, C, D, or E. If you get it right, we'll send you a glass of wine. If you get it wrong, it'll be an electric shock. C, A, C, 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 C. Oh, okay, yeah, there's a few variations, mainly C. Well, it is C. Well done for those of you doing C. And don't be shy, don't worry. Really, we already saw very early on in language teaching this idea that there was the primacy of the speaking skill, more so than the reading and writing. And even in the direct method and grammar and translation methods, we did see speaking as what was known as the queen of skills and so on. But in the 1900s, this shifted even more so. Any guesses then in the 1900s, which letter refers, and it becomes quite logical, which letter refers to the 1900s? Any guesses? A, B, D, or E? First one to the post. Getting a few in. It's not B. It is in fact E. This idea that we began from the 1900s to see speaking, conversational tasks mainly, in speaking exams and in teaching. So whilst the communicative approach was much later, the first proficiency exams were all conversation-based. The first proficiency exam, by the way, was in 1913, which was the Cambridge Proficiency Exam. So then in the 1970s, and don't worry, we'll move on slightly faster, we began to see performance as competence. So this was A, and this was when Himes, who first talked about an etymology of speech, said actually, when you use language, it's like a performance. You're doing something that is akin to a performance, and to perform well, you need competencies. And really, that was the emergence of the communicative approach. When we shifted from grammar translation, and we know from the early 70s onwards, we had the real change in the way we viewed language and teaching into that communicative approach. And with that came this idea of communicative competence. And this was about speech acts, speech situations, speech events. The idea being speech happens in a situation. So we had a dinner party, there would be a speech event, you might talk to me about recipe, and the speech act, you might hear about it, or something like this. So it really was pulling apart these competencies. This developed, and then about the 90s carried on through this, we had this idea that action involves negotiation. So this would be the B, and this really begin to see language like we see it now. So when I talk to you, we are me, I'm able to speak, I have, we're negotiating, we're actually able to create together communication. So then you'll see that we have the 1990s where this is really taken apart even more, that when we interact, when we communicate, and this is slightly different what we're doing now, because Alicia and I are talking a little bit, but essentially this is quite monologic. It's quite just me talking at a screen, which is the worst sort. But when you're talking to your partner, your friends, your students, whoever it might be, we know that that interaction includes two key elements. Those two key elements are a psychological construct. So that's what you bring as an individual to the communication, but we also have the social construct. So that's to do with the context, that's to do with what happens between the people involved. And it's the two of those that come together, and when we start analyzing those, that we begin to see what's happening in real communication. And as we're so nice, there are the answers. Of course, the PowerPoint slides will be available to you afterwards. Alicia, I don't know how much we're going to charge. I thought €10.
We need to earn for wine, you know. We need some money for wine, so we'll charge €10.
So the next slide kind of gives a summary of our current understanding of what we mean by communicative competence. I keep saying the word wrong. I can't communicate well. This idea that there is a psychological construct and a social construct, as I've said, and together they create meaning. Alicia, anything you'd want to add at this point?
Yeah, I think I can add something about this psychological construct. As you said, you know, they somehow correlate. So communication is not only what the speaker has in his brain, but also what happens between two people. But from psychological point of view, it's really important, you know, what the speaker, what the individual brings to the communication situation, yeah, the communicational situation, because our cognitive system, affective system, they all influence the way how we communicate. So there are many different elements which can influence the whole situation we interact with somebody else. So sometimes we have so-called filters in our brain which decide how we perceive and how we convey the information. And I will come back to it when we talk about coding and decoding, but it's important to understand that the whole communicative situation is just these two elements which have to correlate to make the communication efficient. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll pick up on that item that you just mentioned, Alicia, which is coding. I've just noticed that someone has, I apparently had Swain and not Swain. My apologies. It should absolutely be Swain. So communicative competence and this idea of a coding cycle, and that's what the next slide is going to unpack, is this idea that whenever you communicate, this entire cycle happens. And I'm just going to talk you through it. And Alicia, do jump in at any point. But can I just have a quick yes or no? Have you heard of the term mentalese before? Is it something you've come across, again, in the chat box? So some yeses, some nos. Now, mentalese, it's not a complicated notion at all. But the idea being that when we, well, I often ask the question, do you, and I've got it on the side, do you think in language? And many of us would say, well, yes, of course I think in language. But I would argue, no, you don't. You can, but you don't. Because actually your brain is capable of thinking at a speed far, far greater than it can generate language. And if you think about, I don't know, an example would be, do you like wine? Sorry, someone mentioned wine. Who mentioned wine? It's too early. It's not fair. If I said, do you like wine? And you say, okay, yeah, yes, or no, I don't. And if I said, well, what's your favorite wine? Let's have one answer. What's someone give me a favorite wine? Could be anything at all. So wine or, that's a good comment, without the H. Anyone got a favorite wine? So a French, let's go for a nice red Bordeaux, shall we say? So if I said, what does it taste like? How would you answer? Now, if I said, what does your favorite French Bordeaux taste like? What would happen here? You don't immediately think of the words that you would describe, the full-bodied or, you know, a chocolatey turn and a bit of vanilla. What you're probably going to do is experience a whole range of cognitive processes, memories. You're going to have some kind of memory of the taste. You're going to probably experience the taste, not in real taste, of course, and all this stuff goes on. And then we go through a process of encoding. And encoding is when you turn mentalese. So mentalese is just the thought, the concept, the mental concept that you wish to communicate, and then we encode it. And that's the key point here, that lots of things happen when you encode. So encoding, and you'll see I've got little arrows going in here, various things go on in the brain, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And when you encode your mentalese, you produce the communication act. So this would be a productive skill. We're going to speak, or I might write. It may even be a physical communication, paralinguistic, something like that. Now, then the opposite happens. So the interlocutor, the person I'm speaking to, then has to do exactly the same. And Alicia used the word filters, but essentially everything that was used to encode is then also used to decode. What is the objective? Well, it's so the speaker, the person that you're talking to, creates mentalies. They get a mental image that's as similar to yours, the original, as is possible. So I think, okay, Bordeaux tastes like this. I'm going to encode my thinking, produce language. You hear the language, you decode it, and what we're hoping for is a match between my mental image and your mental image. So this is the common communication cycle. Nothing really record-breaking or shocking here, but what we want to do is start to break down the linguistic resources, the cognitive factors, so what is it going on in the brain, and the contextual factors that are involved in that encoding and the decoding. And often, the better you are at communicating, you see less decay, what we refer to as decay in this cycle. So you're able to get that mental image across, if you like. There'll be a day we just plug a wire in one ear and plug a wire in someone else's ear, and we don't have to worry with all this language stuff, but it'll be a while yet. So here we have the communication cycle. Now, Alicia, you're an expert on this decoding, encoding. Anything you'd add in regards to how we encode or decode?
I'm not an expert, but I think it's. Can you switch off the microphone, because I think there's the echo. I think it's important to remember that as Alex said, this decoding and encoding, I mentioned the filters, and it's important for conveying the information, because very often we have the similar image in our brain, but because of the filters, we may understand completely different thing than the other person wants to convey. So in psychology, there is something called scotoma. Scotoma is a selective perception. So it means that you hear what you want to hear, and you create in your brain the picture which is somehow a consequence of your earlier experience, sometimes of your cultural background and different other elements. So this scotoma is a very important element in communication process, because sometimes it blocks, the whole process, the transactional communication. Because if you perceive only the elements which suits to your picture, let's say, of something which the other person is conveying, then you don't really grasp the whole information from the other person. So scotoma, selective perception, and sometimes it's worth remembering. Okay.
Absolutely, thank you. And those kind of conformational biases that really, change the way we perceive. Now, one thing I do want to consider in a bit more detail is this idea of linguistic resources. Now, most of us will be English teachers or language professionals. And this idea that often we teach, and this is our real point of focus, is the linguistic resources. Now, that we're going to unpack in a moment, but really what we need to be aware of is when we encode, we bring to the table every single piece of linguistic resource we have. So if I'm speaking in an English class, I don't just bring my English brain to the activity. I actually bring all my linguistic resources. Now, if I speak 3 languages or 2 languages or whatever it might be, I'm actually engaging in a massive amount of data and processing to be able to encode or decode. And this is why the better we understand this, the more we've seen the emergence of these multilingual competencies. It's not about being a monolingual activity. And this is why now there's quite a strong reaction against the kind of English only in the classroom. This idea we should be able to operate more freely between our L1 and our L2, or our L1 and our target language. This idea of code switching and translanguaging. So that's just a point to not dwell on too long, but just as we unpack these, what do we mean by the things we bring to the encoding and decoding? Well, we've just mentioned linguistic resources. So this idea of all my repertoire of language, all of my experience of language, and that can carry with it a lot of emotion as well. Now, Alicia knows something I'm incredibly interested in is second language identity, and interesting research on how when someone learns English or any language as a second language, they often adopt a different identity, almost a different personality in that second language as compared to their first. And a lot of this is to do with the way they learn the language, with the way they are encouraged to process the language. And again, the kind of emotional connections and preferences I've put in here that are involved with that. Now, cognitive factors, and I know, Alicia, you're going to expound on this in a moment, is really about everything else that goes on in the brain that the individual brings to this encoding and decoding. Now, of course, it's physical, it's who they, are they tired, are they hungry, and all that kind of stuff, their previous experience, but critically, their psychology. You cannot divorce an individual from their psychology. Now, communication is a temporarily held thing. It happens in a moment of time. So I'm talking to you now, and before I came onto this webinar, what happened to me? What did I bring here that's in my emotional backdrop? What is it I'm really thinking about? Do I need the toilet? Am I worried about paying a bill? Do I need to walk the dog? Whatever it is, these things may seem mundane, but whatever's in my mind, I bring to the table, to the communication I'm in. And I think this is something often we forget as teachers. Certainly I was guilty as a teacher and a teacher trainer. You kind of assume students come in as little learning language robots, or teachers come in as methodology learning robots. But no, we have to engage and personalize every bit of content, every bit of teaching and learning to address that, to be able to engage the whole learner. And last but not least, these contextual factors. So this idea that someone that is communicatively competent, yes, they have the linguistic resources, yes, they are able to deal with the cognitive factors and use appropriate processing, but they're also able to engage with the contextual factors. So this idea that, I understand the context, the socio-cultural context. And again, we'll unpack a little bit of what this means in a moment. Now, Alicia, I wanted to hand over to you for a bit, really, to talk about and unpack this notion that what are the cognitive factors we talk about in encoding and decoding. So when I engage in communication, lots of cognitive processes and that psychological aspect that we bring to any communication. Maybe you could unpack that a little bit.
I need to switch on the mic. Yeah, so of course, communication engages whole psychology of the learner. So the first thing, which is really important, is the perception of myself, how you perceive yourself. I would like to make it a little bit interactive. Could you write down in the chat how the perception of your students, their perception, influences their process of learning English? Or what perception can, how perception can change this process? Or what do you associate with that? Because it's really important how we perceive, how the student perceives himself or herself, and it has a very important meaning in the whole process. Just a few things, if you could write, how it can correlate. Somebody's writing. Demotivate, or the opposite. They underestimate their potential. Yes, very important. If they believe they make many stupid mistakes, they are blocked, they don't make progress. Exactly, Joanna. Thank you for that. If someone is dynamic, active, and open, it makes our relations more interestingly. Good. Yeah. So you're right. If somebody perceives himself as a stupid, not capable of speaking any language, then usually the language production is limited, because you don't believe that you can achieve anything. Poor or anxious, exactly. The other thing is my beliefs. We all know how core beliefs can influence our behavior and our life. I don't know if you remember, if you had any core beliefs that which influence your way of learning English, for instance. Because it's something extremely important that core beliefs students have. If somebody believes that he can't speak any foreign language and he believes in it, he won't speak. And it actually refers to any other activity. Anxious. Well, so core beliefs are very, very important. Then emotions, and we have been talking a lot about positive emotions, about positive psychology. Even with Alex, we talked about it during our IATFL in Gdańsk. And you know that if somebody associates the learning English with something positive and positive emotions, then we create a positive memory in our brain. So whenever it comes to the situation when you have to speak to somebody, should we send our student or psychologist? Maybe it's not necessary you are psychologists yourselves. I think that our teachers in Poland are good psychologists. Yeah, but positive emotions are really very important, or what emotions the students have. Sometimes, as we know, they feel lots of anxiety, they feel frustrated, they feel confused, insecure, you know, and we all know that if we have this kind of emotions, our behavior is absolutely blocked, is limited. So positive feedback, as somebody said, yes, from teachers can make students go a long way. Yeah, thanks, Justina. So it's important. The other thing is, what is my position in the group? I don't know if you have an experience, but if somebody is not accepted in the group and has really very bad relationships in the group, you know, he can't even say a word. Yesterday, I had to replace one of my teachers, and I was teaching like 12 years old. And one of the students was really very shy. She started to cry. I didn't know what happened really because I don't know the group. But the group behaved really very well. You know, they encouraged her. Probably she had some family problems, not really connected with the lesson. But if you don't feel secure in a group, if you don't feel that you belong to the group, then the whole, you know, linguistic production will be limited. So also the relationship with the teacher, with the educator is important. If we know that if we like the teacher, I don't know what your memories are from your learning years, but if we like somebody, if the teacher makes you feel safe, secure, then you open up. But if you sit in the classroom, you know, being stressed, frustrated all the time, even if you know lots of words, lots of tenses, vocabulary, you won't really say a word. So all these elements, it's just, you know, I'm trying to say it very briefly, but the whole psychology of the learner is really, really important. So sometimes it's not just the communication act, you know, that you have to produce a sentence, but there are lots of things going on in your brain. So just remember about that. Okay, Alex? Yeah. And also, when we talk about communication, it's important to remember about something we call psychology of self. What is self? I don't know how you understand the concept of self, but we can have lots of different elements which would somehow describe self. But some of them, which are also connected to this whole psychology and communication process, is definitely our willingness to communicate. If somebody doesn't want to communicate, yeah, he won't. Sense of agency, another important thing. So it's connected with the psychological concept of locus of control. If you think that you have any influence on the situation, that you can change something, that you have control of the situation and you can do something, then you are empowered. But if you think that, you know, it doesn't matter if you say something or not, then you lose motivation to talk. Motivation, emotion, self-regulation, position group, I've already mentioned it, so I don't want to talk too much, but it's all important in any communication situation. Our self and self-regulation and all these, you know, cognitive and affective elements. Okay, Alex.
Thank you. And I really, just to add to that, I thought that was a brilliant comment, Christian. But should we send our students to a psychologist? There's a few I would probably send to a psychiatrist, but that's a different question. But I think I really agree with what Alicia said, that in fact we are, as teachers, as teacher trainees, we are psychologists. And this comment down the bottom, that if you are going to communicate effectively, this concept of self and the whole self construct is critical. But it's not an objective truth. And what I mean by this is we can work as teachers, we can facilitate a very positive psychological environment. Now, I'm not talking about therapy, and I'm not talking about a really in-depth work with any particular students. There's a lot of, and again, we're going off on a tangent here, but that idea that these things are malleable, these things do change. And in fact, going back to this working in a second language, communicative competence, that competence is about being able to align these aspects of self that you are then comfortably able to work within the psychological boundaries that we've been discussing. Now, I've glossed over that very quickly. We need another 3 webinars, Alicia, but I'll leave that to you to arrange. But so just to recap, where are we? Well, what we're saying then is that an effective communicator, we could describe them as having communicative competence. Current theory, both methodological and empirically evidenced, suggests to us that there is the psychological construct that we've just discussed, so the individual element, but there's also this social construct. So what happens between the interlocutors, between the speakers? And what we're going to do is unpack that a little bit more practically. So this idea that when you are in the social construct, that you're talking to another individual or group of people, what are the resources? And I've called them here interactional resources, calling upon Young. Well, here we're looking at really basic stuff: turn-taking, repairing breakdown in communication, paralinguistics, so that idea of all your body language, eye contact, and this idea of appropriacy. And these we'll look at a little bit more. But what we're going to ask are really simple questions that if we are going to nurture good communication activities in the classroom, if we're going to teach communicative competence, what can we do in the classroom to facilitate this? What are the skills we need to look at? What are the kind of tasks we need to look at? Now, my background is testing. As you know, I work for Trinity College London. So our job is to say the same thing, but how do we represent and reflect this in a test? What I would argue is, as teachers, we need to say the same thing. How do we do this in the classroom? Because I believe that if we're teaching a language, why are we teaching it? What's the objective? And I would say ultimately it's to teach someone to be able to communicate, because it's perfectly possible to learn a language, all the building blocks, the vocabulary, the grammar, and all of that, and yet not be able to effectively communicate. So what I'm going to do is move on to a definition. Now, there's no animation on this slide, so you've got it all at once, which is terrible. And I don't know what to do. But anyway, you have it all at once, so just feed your eyes. But really, this is a key part of this, that when we're going to talk about communicative competence, we need a really key definition with all these things. And you might notice there's been a little shift here between, or from, communicative competence to interactional competence. And this is something that we've seen the trend move. So Canale and Swain, spelt AI, moving on to Bachman and Palmer, moving on to Young, moving on to Comskin, and so on and so forth. We've seen this emerge, that it's not just about communication, it's about interaction. And there's one really key word here, this idea of co-construction. And yes, it is co-construct, not con-construct. I've just noticed 2 typos. I don't know. I'll find my code. But the idea of co-construction is this idea we build the communication together. So here's Young's definition. The ability to co-construct interaction is a purposeful and meaningful way, taking into account the sociocultural and pragmatic dimensions of the speech situation and event. Now, it's another way of saying what we've already said. But really importantly, now we can begin to look at the micro features or the micro skills or the sub skills. What are we talking about with interaction? Now, this is separate to purely linguistic competence. And when we look at models of competence, you'll see in a moment they separate out linguistic competence and other types of competence. And we'll look at that model literally in about 2 minutes. But when we're just looking at the interactional competence, there are 5 key areas of skills that are identified and taught. Now, have a quick look at these. These are the blue lozenges along the bottom. So very obvious, actually. There's nothing rocket science here. But I think some of them, it really helps if we can label it, we can limit it. If you can label it, we can teach it. And if we label it, we can assess it. And if we're assessing how one or teaching someone to interact, these are the things they need. So we have turn management. Now, again, it's been quite interesting, Alicia, actually, how we've taken little turns, and we've been very polite, very formal, and we've actually introduced turns and so on. Of course, it's nothing like that in real life. And of course, you overtalk, you overlap, different people answer at the same time. And there is a tremendous amount of skill involved with managing turn taking. Now, we do it, we take it for granted. Some interesting questions. Does turn taking management move from your L1 ability into your L2? Well, actually, it may not do in the way you think, because there are linguistic devices we use to control turn-taking. Moving on to the second lozenge. Oh, I think I can get a big arrow here to do this. Here we are. I'm going to get a nice pointer. So topic management. This is very simple. The idea, whenever you're talking about something, you're talking about something. Now, I'm currently talking about interactional competence. It's quite hard not to talk about nothing, not to talk about anything. I know a couple of people that might. But anyway, when I initiate a new topic in a conversation, there are things I need to be able to do. Similarly with developing those, with shifting one topic to another. It's actually very rude in a negative politeness culture just to cut off a topic. You really need to gently move from one to another. And this idea of closing down a topic. So actually now I do want to move on, or I've finished with that. Paralinguistics, Alicia's more of an expert by a long shot. This idea of how we use our everything that's visual, my eye contact, my facial expression, and in fact, this comes down to the clothing you wear. There was some really interesting work in the colors you wear and how well that communicates or does not communicate. In fact, the color you wear can determine if you are a good communicator or not, according to recent research. So those are whole paralinguistic things. And then this idea of breakdown repair. What happens when it doesn't work? Now, I'm almost hand on heart can say I'm sure everyone on this webinar has learned how to repair breakdowns online, because that's an entirely different skill. And there are digital communicative competencies where you're actually having to do this kind of work to actually fix things that go wrong. And then last but not least, interactive listening. This idea of showing interest and back channeling, interactive, or if you like, active listening. This idea I'm listening, okay, I'm showing interest, continuous, I'm facilitating you to continue. So these are the kind of building blocks of interactional competence. Olfactory communication as well. Well, yep, there's actually there are actually some interesting areas of smell and taste involved with this, but I'm not going to go down that avenue now. Now, Alicia, anything you can add that you would enlighten me in regard to these kind of the micro features? Now, of course, what I would say is this is interwoven with the psychological aspects as well, and we'll unpack these in a moment. Alicia, anything you'd add?
Well, there are many elements. I think we don't have enough time to go into details, but paralinguistics and and these non-verbal elements, they are really very important. And I think something which is worth remembering is so-called proxemic. So how you manage with the space when you talk to somebody. Sometimes we are not aware that the distance, the interpersonal spatial distance, can make a difference. It's very much culturally rooted. But if you invade somebody's space, it can really have a very bad impact on the way he communicates, because he's blocked. You enter his intimate sphere. So it's important, but also kinesthetics and all these elements which are very important. And sometimes even when we communicate in a foreign language, it's worth remembering that this whole aspect of paralinguistics is a key element, because, for instance, when I speak Italian, that was my discovery, because I think when I speak Italian, I become a completely different person, and my paralinguistics and nonverbal communication is even more vivid. Even though people who know me, that I have a little bit ADHD and I'm very expressive, but the language also sometimes activates this paralinguistic in a very specific way, depending on the language we use. So that's the element is worth remembering.
And I guess that's a situation that's, I don't know, it's interesting to reflect on that in this kind of Zoom era of COVID, where actually that distance, is negated, isn't it? There is a very large distance, however you look at it, usually for online teaching, I mean, but
just one thing, because as I'm a psychotherapist, and very often when I talk to people who are very kinesthetic and they love, shortening the distance, it's just horrible for them to work online, because usually they when they talk to somebody, they touch somebody's hand or arm or shoulder. So some of them even told me that when they speak using Zoom, they touch the desk or something like that, because they need to have this physical contact. So it's really something connected to our nature and personality.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Thank you. And that idea also, the way you respond to that, again, of course, becomes part of this interactional competence. I'm just going to mention a few areas of research that may be of interest to you. Because we start now to say, well, how do we take this into the classroom? That's fine to say you've got the psychological being. It's fine to say we've got these areas of communicative competence. So what I want to do is start breaking this down into something more practical. And there's a huge amount of research in regard to how we can best facilitate teaching communicative competence and testing it. Now, again, my background's testing, but this idea that when you have a one-to-one interview with a teacher or a one-to-one activity, and this could be an exam, there tends to be a question and answer culture builds up. So the student may expect you to ask questions, they respond. And you may say, well, that's really valuable interaction. Well, most of the research says, no, it's not. This doesn't reflect real life communication at all. You have one type of communication, which is an interview, but actually that's a very rare type of communication. The communication you want is co-constructed. Now that co-construction, coming from the interactional competence, this idea of building it together. So it was put in, I mean, the Young and Milanovich's work, they talked about an asymmetrically contingent relationship. All that means is one person dominates and the other one plays the second fiddle, I think is the expression. But what was really interesting is all this work looking at group tasks. So students working with students, or teachers or examiners working with students, but it's not question and answer led. So it's co-constructed, it's a discussion, not an interview. And what we see is those key areas, and I've just given some of the research papers here, you see far more complex language emerging. So even if you're not teaching it, it emerges of its own accord when we have paired group work, exaggerated group work, meaning larger groups. And look at some of the skills that come out. So all the topic negotiation skills we've mentioned, there's evidence of those being far better exposed, if you like, all those to do with interactional management, and really importantly, those to do with cognitive processes. So you may say, well, this is obvious. Of course, I'm going to use group work in my class, or I'm going to use pair work. But again, it's this idea of not just using pair work and group work, but thinking about the relationships therein, and to ensure the construct, i.e., the target of the activity, is going to be one of co-constructed discourse. So that is the one that's going to be aligned to real life communication. And let's look at the model we've used on this. And this is the one of communicative competence. Now, again, this was meant to be in animation, so you didn't get it all at once. But I'm going to hand over to you for a little bit here. Now, this is Bachman and Palmer's model of communicative competence, which reflects precisely the things we've been talking about. And he talks about, or they, sorry, talk about 4 key areas of communicative competence. So linguistic, sociolinguistic, discourse or discoursal, and strategic. Now, all the things we've mentioned so far, and you have those lozenges on the right, fit into here very neatly. It's not a different model, it's just a way of labeling it. So what I want to do is just have a quick look at these, and I'm going to test your typing skills and whether you're still awake and whether you've had a glass of wine or not. If we start with each of these, I'm just going to ask you to give me a response as to each one. So first of all, linguistic competence, what is it? Just a few words, if you could type very quickly, what is a linguistic competence? Because I just want to unpack the skills that sit in each of these. So what is linguistic competence? This is the part, Alicia, which we should start playing the piano or the like. So who's going to be first up? Something to do with linguistic competence. Grammar and vocab, understanding the written language. Yeah, spot on, all of these. Now, linguistic competence, exactly as we're saying here, yeah, spot on, is the building blocks of language. So everything we've said about interaction doesn't put these in the bin. These are still a pillar of communication. And linguistic competence are the 4, well, really it's to do with lexis, so my vocabulary. It's to do with grammar, how I build that lexis into structure. It's to do with phonology, So literally the kind of physical act of creating understandable utterance. And it's also to do with syntax and the way it all fits together. Anything you'd add, Alicia, on a linguistic competence?
Oh, no, I think it's actually, we have some answers here written, ability to use all the skills. I think that's really the linguistic competence, yeah. So I won't add anything, just.
And can I ask, as teachers, with the massive experience we have here, how do you think, have you experienced students that may be very, very strong in linguistic competence, and yet they're not good communicators? So again, just type a yes or a no. But now you need them. But I would argue, Kinga, I completely agree that, yeah, there's often people that learn a lot about the language in regard to the linguistics, but they don't learn some of these other skills. And I really think that as teachers, what we need is that understanding of what the other skills are. And that's what we're touching on. And that's why we're unpacking communicative competence and why we're saying it really is central to what we do as teachers. I'm not going to talk much about discoursal competence, because really discoursal competence is just around the red thread, how things fit together and become logical. Now, you'll be aware with coherence and cohesion in written grammar and discourse. We talk about narrative discourse and so on. There's a lot of skills there. Quick question for you. What's more complicated, discourse in speech or discourse in writing? What do you think? Which is more complicated, discourse in speech or discourse in writing? Okay, well, some mixed responses, predominantly speech. It's much more complicated in speech. In fact, written discourse is really very simple comparatively. We essentially have our narrative tenses or our tense structure and so on. Discourse in speech is incredibly complicated. To be able to follow a line of thread, to be able to have a consistent level of appropriacy, and that's to do with the level of formality and all that kind of stuff. So speech discourse is far more complicated, and yet we spend far more time generally teaching written discourse. It is important, I'm not saying it's not, but just in regard to complexity. Now, those are the kind of building blocks of language, but then we come over to the sociolinguistic competence and your strategic competence, and these are really important to how we view the whole notion of communicative competence. Now, sociolinguistic competence, I'm going to throw that to everybody again. What do we think sociolinguistic competence is? So any answers, any quick guesses, or informed answers? No long essays, though. Register, language functions, social background. Yeah, all of this. Culture, it does. Brilliant. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, it's all of those, everything there that we've mentioned. Now, the idea is when I speak to somebody, I have to do what I can as a communicator to make what I'm saying accessible to the person I'm speaking to. Sociolinguistic competencies or skills are what I do to make what I'm saying accessible to you. So yes, it's cultural features. So if I was to use a lot of East London analogous language and metaphors, it would probably be quite confusing because they wouldn't be language that's common or that you may have access to. Now, similarly, if Alicia came back and spoke to me in Polish, I would be completely lost. So this idea that we actually find, and this is where the lingua franca argument sits, but this idea of, yes, and completely agree, Elena, knowing your audience, knowing your listener, and then adjusting what you're saying to make it accessible to them. This includes appropriacy, cultural sensitivity, all the things that are sitting there. And then we have strategic competencies, and this is really what we're looking at, and it's the last one, and it's to do with co-construction. It's to do with all of those things that sit on the right of your screen. This is the idea that when you are in a conversation, when you are communicating, you don't know what's coming next. I'm going to give you an example. Alicia, I'd like to ask you a question. Yeah, I don't know. What did you do last night?
I was chatting on Zoom with my friend from Japan.
Ah, okay. Actually, it's quite predictable at this time of COVID that we Zoom. And actually, I have no idea what Alicia was going to say. So what would I say now that would be an appropriate response to Alicia? So what would you say? You've just heard Alicia say, well, I was on Zoom chatting to my friend from Japan. Just seeing a few quick responses. What would you say? Sounds great. Brilliant. How nice, Rio. Okay, so we have an interesting few things here. So some people are back channeling. Oh, how nice. Oh, really? So showing interest. So this is clearly an interactive strategy. Did you have a good time chatting? Okay, we're expanding and so on. This is a lot of interactive listening, partly topic management as well, interestingly. So, but if I turn around and my response was, oh, okay, 74. Now, of course, it doesn't make any sense at all. Now, strategic competence is what you've just, essentially the skills you've engaged, where I didn't know what Alicia was going to say. Something has come out and I need to respond appropriately. Now, that sounds obvious, but actually that takes a lot of processing that fits in. And we go back, if you remember, it talks about the psychology. So it's all my own psychology I bring to that. And it comes back to the interlocution, what I'm saying with Alicia. And I have to bring all those factors into play. Now, the point is this, that if we do anything in the classroom, so think of an activity you did, maybe something today that you did on Zoom, and if you were to audit the activity for the skills that it focuses on, now, which would it focus on? Now, this is just a little moment for you to reflect. So have a quick think. Think of one activity you did with your students, and actually it's more difficult on Zoom to do this, so actually it's a little bit unfair. And again, just reflect, what were the skill sets involved? Well, if it involves some grammar and some accuracy or some pronunciation, then obviously it's my linguistics. Was I looking at register and appropriacy? Was I looking at the discourse? Or was I looking at some of these strategic competencies? Now, you can guess what I'm going to say is when we do audit a vast amount, and in teacher training, when we look at a lot of what happens in the classroom, something, well, I can't give a percent, and it's very cultural. It depends on the country. A lot of activities, a lot of focus falls in linguistic competencies. Why? It's easy. It's labeled. It's limited. Grammar's a mathematical system. It's not difficult to teach linguistic competencies. I'm being slightly provocative. Of course, it's difficult, but you know what I mean. Whereas some of the other skills are really, really quite difficult to teach. And I think these are the ones that we need to focus on. And the next slide, before I hand over to Alicia, just for any comments, is this idea that if we do have any kind of activity, we can actually just say very quickly, what is it doing linguistically? What's it doing sociolinguistically? And so on and so forth. And I would say that at certain levels of language, we can do this very openly. This can be explicit. So we say to students, you know, so what are the strategic competencies? What are those things? And I'm just going back, you know, looking at these things on the right, the term management and so on. What are the things we need to learn? What are you doing? How are you practicing this? So on and so forth. Alicia, I'm talking far too much as usual. Anything you'd like to add?
You are doing very well. So I think, yeah, no, just I think it's important because it's easy in theory, but when you come to the classroom and look at the practical side of that, how do we include all these elements? Because as we said, it's easy to think about the linguistic competence, yeah, because we're trying to teach the language, the linguistic patterns, but then sometimes I think we really forget about the sociolinguistic and strategic competence. That is not enough to know the language, the linguistic patterns, but there's, as people were writing in chat, there are many elements which make it impossible for students to produce the language, even though they know it, you know, cognitively. So this strategic competence, I think, is something we have to develop and pay attention to. Okay, go on, because we have only 7 minutes left, so I
7 minutes. That's fine. In the chat box, could I ask you, what do you think these are examples of? So these sentences, what do you think they are? Again, this was animated, so there's a few clues there, but any guesses? These are examples of what? testing, activities, instructions. Yes, lots of instructions coming through. There are instructions. All of these are high stakes language exams that claim to test your English language proficiency. However, if we look at any of these tasks, and these are all common now, you'll find them, these tasks in common exams, my argument would be, are they really testing your ability to use the language? And again, going back to our last point, are you actually interacting? Now, it doesn't mean there aren't, in certain contexts, these examples could be absolutely perfect. I'm only looking in the context of interaction. So yes, listen to a recording, select the right answer, fine. If I'm just doing discrete item listening, fine. But what I'm saying is, a lot of these don't look at those other competencies. They're all based on discrete item linguistics. And that's fine, that's absolutely fine if that's what you're testing. But my argument is we need to look wider and see that when we're in the classroom using activities, or when we're using tests, now I come from Trinity, so you know what I'm going to say, and don't worry, I won't say it for long. What we want to do is see if a student can use the language to communicate, not if they can only use the building blocks, which are those linguistic competencies. I don't know, Alicia, from a Polish perspective, what would you add in regard to, I don't know, approaches to tasks, both classroom and assessment?
I think, we have some formal regulations, and it's usually difficult for teachers, because even if you want to teach for communication, for interaction, very often teachers, they can write, I think, in chat, they need to teach also the students to do some tests which are purely linguistic. And this is the dilemma, because, we know that the formative assessment is probably more preferable, but still, the tests which we have to do, which are formally, important because the ministry wants them to do, they are testing usually only the linguistic competence, not necessarily the interaction. But I think teachers in Poland are doing really very well, because we're trying to develop this interaction competence. And usually, yes, in public schools, somebody's definitely yes. So, it depends on the situation, depends where we teach, and I think it is changing. But when you look at the formal tests, I do agree that usually we test just the linguistic competence.
And I'm not saying this at all critically, and that's completely legitimate. That's a perfectly legitimate activity. But again, it's what we expect from the tests and what we want the test to show us. And you'll be familiar with washback as well, that if I'm testing discrete item linguistic competence, then that's what will happen in the classroom, of course. So it really is just about thinking about what sits behind these kind of activities. Now, I'm just going to spend 2 minutes just literally to refer to Trinity. Now, I'm from Trinity College London. You know what I'm going to say. Our exams have been built on communicative competence. Others have. We're not the only ones. And I'm not here to shout down any other. But all I would say is when we built our exams, and I've got our 2 main suites here, a Jessie, which is 2 skills, and ISE. These are one-to-one exams with an examiner, but they're not scripted. It's not question and answer. It really is a dialogic discussion. And if you look at the way we assess the exams, well, they really are looking at these multiple competencies that sit within communicative competence. We want people that take the test to be able to walk away from them saying, yes, I know I can communicate, I can interact at that level of language that's involved. And just to focus again a little bit on that, ISE is the 4 skills high stakes exam. Jessie is the lower skills, not lower skills, sorry, lower stakes 2 skills exam. And you'll see the kind of activities, and this is the ISE, and they're the kind of things you can do in the classroom. A topic task which is discussed, a collaborative task where there's some kind of scenario which is discussed and the candidate has to take the lead and pick up and really use those strategic competencies. The conversation task is slightly more structured, but again, it's dialogic. And then the listening task, which is separate. So really just a quick reflection that the idea being that what we've tried to do at Trinity is really reflect real life communication in what we do in the tests. And what I would say, do have a look at the syllabuses that we run, not to take the exams. No worry if you never take the exams, but as an educational charity. All of that's available online. And what I would say, you can see how we've broken down all of those different skills into different levels, lots of free teaching materials and so on. And there's a website on the final screen in 30 seconds. Alicia, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add before we finish up.
Yeah, I can only add that really Trinity exams have a bit different approach to testing, and we think that the learner is really in the center. So it's very different from the formal tests we usually use here in Poland. So I just, I think that it was the reason I got involved in Trinity College, because I do believe that the learner has to be in the center. So everything goes around the learner, and we devise the tests completely differently. So just if anybody would like to, know more about the tests or is interested in setting up the testing center, just you can contact me later, or me or Alex. Here you have also the email, which we have in Poland. Yeah, I think that's.
Thank you, Alicia. So just to finish then, thank you so much for your time, for spending even more of your day in front of a computer, staring at a screen, which I think takes strength, commitment, and wonder. So the final slide is just a repeat of this one earlier, just to say that we've been looking at interactional competence. This idea of co-construction means about purposeful, meaningful communication, and those micro skills that sit within strategic competencies. Hopefully these are things we can push into our classroom. So very happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Just to go back to that final slide, you can find me at Trinity College. I'll put my email in the chat box as well. And I think this, Alicia, is your email. So thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful evening. I am going to have a glass of wine in about 27 seconds. But until that point, any questions, do feel free to throw them into the chat box.
Yeah. Yes. And I also want to say thank you, and I wish you lots of good communication in the evening, because it's all about socializing and communicating. So not only in our classrooms with teachers and students, but also in our families. So communicate, and especially now when we are really blocked and we sit in front of the computer. So now the task is to communicate with real people in your house. So have a good evening and have some good wine, which you like, and see you soon, I hope.
Seriously, guys, I was absolutely scared when you mentioned the wine, because I was just having one. And I thought, oh my God, they must be reading my mind, So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Alicia, and thanks, Alex. You showed truly humane face of testing. Well, yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, and it's been a pleasure to listen to you. See you guys, and we hope to see you in the future as well. To all participants here on webinar, in the webinar room, and also on ITEFL Facebook page, you will receive the certificates either in the automatic emails, or you can download them from the web page, the webinar web page on our itefl.org.pl. Thank you very much, and see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.